Every night, the sheriff of Meadowbrook, a small town with only a few main streets, went on his regular rounds. He'd been keeping this town safe for over 20 years, making sure things stayed quiet and peaceful. Most nights, nothing unusual ever happened. He'd wave to the few late-night workers or spot the occasional stray dog roaming the streets. His rounds usually included a quick check of the local businesses, the bakery, the grocery store, and the 24-hour laundromat at the edge of town. One evening, while passing by the laundromat, the sheriff noticed something he hadn't seen before. Sitting alone by the large washing machines was a young girl, maybe around 12 years old, with a big laundry bag beside her. She had her eyes down, completely focused on a book she was reading, and she seemed so small sitting there, almost swallowed by the oversized machines around her. At first, he thought it might be a one-time thing. Maybe her parents had a late shift or were picking her up soon. But as he continued his rounds that week, he saw her there every single night, always alone, always at the same time. Curiosity started to get the better of him. He couldn't help but wonder why such a young girl would be at the laundromat by herself every night. She looked a little lost yet determined, as though she had a purpose for being there. On the 5th night, he decided to stop and speak to her. He tried not to come off as intimidating. After all, he didn't want to scare her away. The sheriff approached her and asked gently, "Hey there, what's your name?" The girl looked up, her eyes a little wary, and she replied quietly, "Maya." He gave her a small, friendly smile and asked, "Maya, are you waiting for someone?" She shook her head and looked away, as if she didn't want to say much. The sheriff could tell she was a little guarded, and he didn't want to push her. He left, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story. Why was she alone? And why did she come to the laundromat every night at the same time? Over the next few days, the sheriff kept thinking about Maya. Every night he drove past, and every night, there she was, sitting quietly with her book and laundry bag. He wanted to help, but he wasn't sure where to start. He started checking with people around town, asking if anyone knew a girl named Maya. He even checked with the local schools and community centers, hoping to find some kind of record or information about her. But no one knew who she was, and there were no records of a girl named Maya living in the area. The sheriff's concern only grew. Something about her made him want to help, to figure out why she was all alone. He began stopping by the laundromat more often, sometimes just watching from his patrol car to make sure she was safe. He didn't know why she was there or what kept bringing her back, but he felt a strange sense of responsibility toward her. Every night, he hoped she'd open up to him, maybe let him know what was really going on. He wanted to make sure she was okay, to help in any way he could. And although he didn't yet know it, this quiet, mysterious girl sitting alone in the laundromat was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. After noticing Maya at the laundromat night after night, the sheriff's curiosity turned into worry. Why was such a young girl always here alone? He couldn't stop thinking about her, wondering if she was safe or if she needed help. Each time he saw her, she sat quietly, lost in her book or staring into one of the empty dryers, her laundry bag always beside her. There was a sadness about her, a kind of loneliness he could feel from across the room. One night, he decided to sit down beside her and try again to get to know her story. "Maya, do you live around here?" he asked gently. She hesitated, glancing down at her book before nodding. "Not far," she replied softly. The sheriff waited, hoping she might say more, but she quickly went silent, as if she didn't want to share any more details. "Do your parents know you're here?" he asked carefully, trying not to seem too concerned, but his heart raced a little, hoping she'd tell them they were nearby. Maya's face grew a little sad, and she looked away. "It's just me and my grandma," she whispered. "She's sick, so I do the laundry." The sheriff felt a pang of sympathy. He hadn't expected that. He imagined how tough it must be for a young girl to take care of things on her own. That's a lot of responsibility for someone your age, he said kindly. How long has your grandma been unwell? Maya looked down at her hands and shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. A while, she answered, her voice barely a whisper. She seemed reluctant to talk, like she didn't want anyone to feel sorry for her. He wanted to say something reassuring, something that would make her feel safe, but he also didn't want to push too hard. The sheriff gave her a gentle smile and told her if she ever needed help, he was just a call away. She gave him a small nod, and he left that night with a heavy heart, feeling torn between respecting her privacy and worrying about her safety. After that conversation, the sheriff couldn't let go of the image of Maya sitting alone in the laundromat, night after night. He felt a connection to her that he didn't fully understand. She reminded him of his own daughter, who had passed away many years ago. He had kept his grief hidden all these years, burying it under his work. But something about Maya brought those feelings back. Seeing her alone, trying so hard to manage on her own, stirred something deep inside him. In the days that followed, he found himself wanting to do more for her. He started asking around the town, hoping someone might know more about Maya and her grandmother. But nobody seemed to know much. She was like a ghost, someone who was there but barely noticed. The sheriff started keeping a close watch over the laundromat, stopping by every evening to make sure she was safe. One evening, as he was passing by, he noticed her struggling with an oversized laundry bag, her small frame almost hidden behind it. He stepped forward, offering to help. She looked surprised, but gave a quiet thank you. As he lifted the bag, he saw the tiredness in her eyes, a weariness far beyond her years. "Take care of yourself, Maya," he said softly. She nodded, but there was a sadness in her eyes that lingered long after she'd left. The sheriff walked back to his car that night, feeling more determined than ever to understand what this young girl was going through and to find some way to help her. In the nights that followed, the sheriff kept a close eye on Maya. Every time he saw her sitting alone in the laundromat, it stirred something inside him. He couldn't just drive past anymore. The image of this small, determined girl, alone with her laundry bag, had worked its way into his thoughts, and he felt a growing need to understand her situation. One evening, he decided to ask her a few more questions, hoping to get to know her a bit better. This time, he brought a couple of sandwiches from the diner down the road. He walked in, handed her one, and sat beside her on the hard plastic bench. She looked surprised, but a small smile crept onto her face as she accepted the food. It was a quiet, simple gesture, but he could tell she appreciated it. They ate together in silence for a while. Then, trying to keep his tone light, he asked, "So, how's your grandma doing? Is there anyone else around who helped you take care of her?" Maya paused, looking down at her sandwich. She seemed to weigh her words carefully before answering. "No, it's just us," she said quietly. She used to be stronger. But now, she needs a lot of rest. Her voice was small, but there was a sadness there, like she'd been carrying this burden for a long time. The sheriff nodded, sensing her hesitation. He wanted to reassure her, let her know she didn't have to bear this weight alone. But he knew better than to push her. Instead, he listened, offering her a safe space to speak if she wanted to. He could see that opening up was hard for her, and it broke his heart to think of all the silent strength she had to muster at such a young age. After a few more bites, she looked up at him, as if considering whether she could trust him. "I've been doing the washing because we don't have a machine at home," she explained. "And Grandma's clothes, well, she needs clean clothes every day." The sheriff nodded, understanding the hard reality she was living. He couldn't imagine a girl her age managing everything alone, without help, without a break. "You're a strong kid," he said softly, impressed but heartbroken by her quiet determination. Maya looked at him, a bit of pride shining in her eyes, mixed with a hint of weariness. It was clear she had taken on this responsibility without complaint, even though it was more than most people her age should ever have to deal with. The sheriff took a deep breath, feeling an urge to protect her, to help in some way. He had an idea. Maybe he could visit her grandmother, just to check on her, make sure she was comfortable. But he knew he had to be careful not to overstep. Maya might be young, but she had a fierce independence about her, and he didn't want to take that away. "Listen, if you ever need anything," he said gently, "or if you ever just want to talk, you can always call me. I'm here to help." She nodded, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment before she looked away, shy but thankful. It wasn't a lot, just a few quiet words, but they felt like the start of something. Maybe trust, maybe a friendship. The sheriff left that night feeling both heavy and hopeful, his mind racing with thoughts of how he could help Maya and her grandmother without making them feel like a burden. The sheriff knew one thing for sure. He couldn't just stand by and watch. This young girl, sitting alone every night in a laundromat, deserved so much more. And somehow, he was going to make sure she got it. The sheriff couldn't shake the thought of Maya, and each night he found himself hoping she'd share more about her life. But Maya wasn't one to open up easily, and he could tell she was used to being quiet about her troubles. She had built up a wall around herself, one that seemed both strong and fragile. Still, he wanted to help, so he started showing up a little earlier each evening, just to spend a few extra minutes with her. One night, as they sat together on the same uncomfortable bench, he noticed her struggling to lift her laundry bag. The sheriff gently took it from her hands and carried it over to the washing machine. As he loaded it in, he noticed that the clothes were worn and a bit faded, with some small tears here and there. It was clear that Maya and her grandmother didn't have much. They were getting by on very little, but he could see that she took care of everything with a lot of pride and love. He tried to keep the conversation light, asking her about school and what subjects she enjoyed. Maya's eyes lit up a little when she mentioned reading. She told him she loved stories, especially ones about people who had to overcome big challenges. It was easy to see why she'd be drawn to those kinds of tales. Her life was one of quiet strength and resilience. The sheriff listened closely, noticing how her face softened whenever she talked about books. It seemed like reading was one of the few escapes she had from her daily struggles. As they continued to talk, Maya grew a bit more comfortable, sharing small pieces of her life. She mentioned how her grandmother used to be strong, always taking care of everything, but now things were different. Her grandma was often tired, sleeping most of the day, and sometimes struggling to remember things. Maya's voice grew soft as she explained how difficult it was to see her once strong grandma so weak. She didn't complain, but the sheriff could tell how much it weighed on her. The sheriff couldn't help but admire her. Maya was doing her best to be brave, holding everything together for her grandmother. But he also felt a deep sadness. No child should have to take on so much alone. He realized that, without any support, she was balancing her own life and her grandma's, trying to keep everything from falling apart. Seeing her struggle like this took him back to memories of his own family. Years ago, he had lost his young daughter in a tragic accident, a pain he had buried deep. Watching Maya's quiet strength, he felt a familiar ache, a longing to protect her in a way he hadn't been able to protect his own daughter. That feeling, that connection, made him even more determined to be there for her. As the evening wore on, he noticed how Maya would check her watch, as if she had a strict routine. She explained that she needed to be home by a certain time to make sure her grandma took her medication. She'd learned how to set reminders, measure doses, and keep a close eye on her grandma's health, all on her own. The sheriff couldn't believe the responsibility she carried and how she handled it with such care. "Is there anything I can do to make things a little easier for you?" he asked, his voice gentle, careful not to make her feel like a burden. Maya thought for a moment before looking up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and worry. She hesitated, as if afraid to ask for anything. Finally, she said, Maybe you could just walk me home once in a while." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the sheriff felt a warmth in his heart at her simple request. He smiled and nodded, promising that he'd be there. It was such a small thing, just a walk, but he could tell it meant a lot to her. In that moment, he realized that sometimes it was the smallest gestures that could make the biggest difference. That night, as he walked her home, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had spent years patrolling empty streets, keeping a quiet town safe, but this was different. This wasn't about duty, it was about being there for someone who needed it. He knew he had a long way to go in helping Maya, but for now, he was content to walk beside her, offering a little light in her life, one small step at a time. The sheriff found himself thinking about Maya even when he wasn't on duty. Her small, serious face, her quiet determination, and the way she shouldered responsibilities far beyond her years had touched something deep inside him. As the days passed, he started to look forward to their evening chats at the laundromat. He'd arrive a little earlier each night, hoping to catch her with a few extra minutes to spare. He noticed she seemed to appreciate the company, even if she didn't say much. One evening, he came prepared with a small gift for her, a new book. He'd stopped by the bookstore earlier that day and asked the owner for recommendations. He wanted something that would bring a smile to Maya's face, a story that would let her escape for a little while. When he handed her the book, her eyes lit up with surprise and joy. She held it carefully, running her fingers over the cover, and thanked him softly. It was just a book, a small gesture, but he could see how much it meant to her. They spent the next hour talking about her favorite stories and characters, and for the first time, she seemed to let her guard down. She spoke with a quiet excitement, telling him about the world she imagined while reading and how stories helped her forget her worries for a little while. The sheriff felt a warmth in his chest as he listened, realizing that he was getting to know a whole new side of her, one filled with imagination and dreams that she rarely shared. As they talked, the sheriff gently asked her how things were going at home. Maya's face grew more serious, and she explained that her grandmother had been having trouble sleeping. Some nights, her grandma would wake up confused, not recognizing their home or even Maya herself. Maya tried to stay strong, but he could see how much it hurt her to watch her grandma struggle like that. She confessed that some nights she was afraid to fall asleep, worried her grandma might need her, and she wouldn't be there. The sheriff felt a deep ache listening to her. He could see how much she loved her grandmother and how hard she was trying to hold everything together. He wondered how he could help her carry even a small part of this burden. He didn't want her to feel like she was alone in this struggle. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Maya, you're doing an incredible job taking care of your grandma. But it's okay to let others help you too." Maya looked at him, her expression thoughtful. She seemed to be considering his words, as though it was the first time anyone had ever told her she didn't have to do it all on her own. He offered to come by their home the next day, just to meet her grandmother and see if there was anything he could do to make things easier for them. At first, she seemed hesitant, but then she nodded slowly. "Maybe that would be okay," she whispered, almost to herself. The sheriff smiled and promised to stop by after his shift the next day. As he walked her home that night, he felt a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a bystander in Maya's story. He was someone she trusted enough to invite into her life, someone she could rely on, even if just a little. The next day, as he prepared to visit Maya's home, he felt a mix of nerves and determination. He knew he couldn't solve all of her problems, but he hoped he could offer some relief, a bit of support that might lighten her load. He wanted her to know that she wasn't alone, that there were people who cared about her and wanted to help. As he approached her small weathered house, he took a deep breath. He could feel the weight of this visit, sensing that it was an important step in Maya's life and his own. Inside, he knew that he wasn't just doing this as a sheriff. He was doing it because he genuinely cared about her, and he wanted to be the support she needed. The sheriff knocked gently on the door of Maya's small weathered home. He could hear her footsteps approaching, quick and light, before the door creaked open. Maya greeted him with a shy smile and led him inside. The house was modest but tidy, a little worn around the edges, with faded curtains and well-used furniture. He could see the careful touches of care in each corner, as if Maya had tried to make things as comfortable as possible for her grandmother. As they stepped into the living room, he noticed an elderly woman resting in a large armchair near the window. She looked fragile, with silver hair pulled back and eyes that seemed distant, staring out at nothing in particular. Maya introduced her grandmother with a soft voice, and the older woman gave a faint smile in response, though her gaze remained unfocused. The sheriff approached gently, offering a friendly smile and introducing himself. "It's nice to meet you. Maya talks about you often," he said, trying to sound warm and reassuring. The grandmother nodded, but her attention seemed to drift, and he could tell her mind was somewhere else. He glanced at Maya, who watched her grandmother with a mix of worry and love in her eyes. As he settled into a chair nearby, he noticed the small signs of care Maya put into her daily life here. A cup of tea sat on a small table by her grandmother's chair, and there were books stacked neatly, along with small notes Maya must have left to remind her grandmother of things throughout the day. It was clear she did everything she could to make her grandmother feel safe and comfortable, even though she was just a young girl herself. After a few minutes, Maya's grandmother spoke, her voice quiet and uncertain. She mentioned something about waiting for someone to come home, a vague statement that seemed to reflect her confusion. The sheriff realized then just how much Maya had been dealing with, trying to comfort her grandmother through these moments of forgetfulness. He couldn't imagine how lonely and difficult it must be for her to handle this every day, yet she seemed so strong. Seeing this, he made a decision. "Maya, I know how much you care for your grandma," he said gently, "but I'd like to help you out whenever I can. Maybe I could stop by once in a while, check in, and see if there's anything you both need." Maya's eyes widened, and she looked at him with a mix of relief and surprise. She had probably grown so used to carrying everything alone that the idea of help seemed almost foreign. Would that really be okay?" she asked, her voice hesitant but hopeful. The sheriff nodded, smiling reassuringly. "Of course. Sometimes even the strongest people need a little help. And you're doing such a great job, Maya, but you don't have to do it all alone." They talked a little more, discussing small ways he could assist, like picking up groceries or helping with repairs around the house. He also suggested that he could bring by some books for her grandmother, hoping that a familiar activity might bring her a little comfort. Maya seemed grateful, her shoulders relaxing slightly, as if a weight had been lifted from her. Before he left, the sheriff paused by the door, looking back at Maya. "Remember, I'm just a call away. You can reach out anytime, day or night." Maya nodded, her expression softening, and for the first time, he saw a genuine, relaxed smile on her face, a glimpse of the young girl beneath all the responsibility. As he walked back to his car, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Maya wasn't part of his usual duties, but he realized this was more important than anything else he could be doing. She was just a child, carrying a world of worry on her small shoulders, and he was determined to be there for her. The sheriff continued to visit Maya and her grandmother whenever he could. Each time he stopped by, he brought little things he thought might help: a bag of groceries, some fresh bread, or a few books. It was clear that Maya's grandmother enjoyed the small comforts, even if she didn't fully recognize the sheriff or remember who he was each time he came over. She would smile softly, accepting his kindness with gentle gratitude, and it warmed his heart to see her a little more at ease. For Maya, these visits were a relief. She had been handling everything alone for so long that having someone else around made the days feel lighter, a little less overwhelming. She even started looking forward to his visits, opening up bit by bit. Slowly, she let him into the routines of her world, the exact way her grandma liked her tea, the medicines she needed, and even the simple joys her grandma had, like listening to old songs or looking through picture books. One evening, While the sheriff was helping Maya prepare dinner, he noticed a worn photo album tucked away on a shelf. Curious, he gently asked if he could look through it. Maya hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her eyes softening as she glanced at the album. As he opened it, he saw black and white photos of a younger version of her grandmother, smiling with friends, enjoying a simpler time. There were photos of family gatherings, birthday parties, and celebrations, each image capturing a memory that now seemed to be slipping from her grandmother's mind. One picture, in particular, caught his eye. A photo of Maya as a little girl, laughing in her grandmother's arms, both of them full of life and happiness. It was clear these memories held a special place in their lives. Maya watched him, a bit of sadness in her gaze. "She was so different back then," she said softly. "She used to sing and tell me stories. Now, she hardly remembers my name." Her voice was low, a mix of longing and hurt, and the sheriff felt a wave of compassion for her. "She may not remember everything," he said gently, closing the album and placing it back. "But she knows you love her. Sometimes that's what matters most." Maya looked at him, her face thoughtful, as if she was letting those words sink in. Over the next few weeks, the sheriff began stopping by even more, not only to help but to spend time with both of them. He brought music that her grandmother might remember, hoping it would bring back some familiar moments. He played old songs, and occasionally her grandmother's eyes would light up, her lips moving as if trying to remember the words. These small connections made a difference, bringing moments of joy to their quiet lives. One evening, as they sat together in the small living room, her grandmother looked over at Maya and the sheriff, a gentle smile spreading across her face. In a rare moment of clarity, she reached out and held Maya's hand, patting it softly. "You're such a sweet girl," she murmured, her voice full of warmth. Maya's eyes brightened, and she squeezed her grandmother's hand, grateful for the moment of recognition. Seeing this, the sheriff felt a deep sense of peace. These small, precious moments meant the world to Maya and her grandmother. He realized that while he couldn't fix everything, he was helping them find small bits of happiness amidst their challenges. And perhaps, in a way, they were helping him too, filling a void he hadn't known was still there. As he got up to leave, Maya walked him to the door, her face reflecting a quiet gratitude. "Thank you for being here," she said softly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." The sheriff smiled, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, Maya. We're in this together." The sheriff's visits had become a regular part of Maya and her grandmother's routine, bringing a small sense of stability to their lives. Maya no longer felt as though she was handling everything by herself. Having someone who genuinely cared, someone who showed up without needing anything in return, gave her a newfound strength. She was still young, but now she didn't feel so alone in her responsibilities. One evening, the sheriff arrived with something special, a small portable radio he had found at a local shop. He remembered how Maya's grandmother used to enjoy music, and he hoped this might spark more memories, or, at the very least, bring a bit of joy to their evenings. When he handed it to Maya, her eyes lit up with excitement. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to her. She carefully turned the dials, finding a station that played gentle, old songs, tunes her grandmother might remember. As the music filled the room, her grandmother's expression softened, her face relaxing as if the songs brought her a kind of peace. She hummed quietly, tapping her fingers in time with the melody. It was a small but precious moment, and Maya and the sheriff exchanged a smile. For a brief time, the worries of their daily lives faded into the background. Maya's grandmother, who was usually distant and quiet, seemed to come alive, if only for a few moments. She looked over at Maya with a glimmer in her eyes, a spark of recognition that was rare these days. She began to speak, her words soft and halting, but full of warmth. "You've always been such a good girl, haven't you?" she murmured, patting Maya's hand gently. Maya's face lit up, and she squeezed her grandmother's hand, her own eyes shining with gratitude for this simple moment. She was so happy to see a glimpse of the woman who had raised her with so much love and care. These were the memories she held on to, memories that kept her going even during the harder days. The sheriff watched this scene quietly, his heart full. He had seen so much hardship in his line of work, so many people struggling to make it through each day, but this was different. Here was a young girl, doing her best to care for her only family, and a grandmother, holding on to memories that were slipping away. His presence here felt more meaningful than anything he had done in a long time. As the evening wore on, Maya seemed more relaxed, her shoulders lighter, and her voice more cheerful. They talked about the little things, her favorite parts of school, the stories she read, and even her dreams of the future. Though she never voiced it, the sheriff could see a quiet hope in her, a wish for better days, and the strength to keep moving forward. He realized that his visits, though small gestures, were helping her believe that she wasn't alone in this journey. When it was time for the sheriff to leave, Maya walked him to the door as usual. This time, however, she looked up at him, her face full of gratitude and a hint of emotion. "You know, I never thought anyone would understand, or even care this much. You've done more than I could ever ask for," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The sheriff knelt down to her level, meeting her gaze. "Maya, you and your grandmother are important to me. I'll always be here as long as you need. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who stand by you when you need them most." Maya's eyes welled up, but she held back her tears, nodding gratefully. As the sheriff stepped out into the cool night air, he felt a sense of peace and fulfillment. This wasn't just about duty or responsibility anymore. It was about connection, hope, and showing up for each other in ways that truly mattered. As he walked down the quiet street, he felt a renewed purpose. He was no longer just a sheriff looking after a town. He was someone who had found a family in the most unexpected of places, and he knew he would keep showing up for them day after day. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between the sheriff, Maya, and her grandmother grew stronger. Each visit brought laughter, shared stories, and moments of warmth that filled their small home. The sheriff continued to bring little gifts, a book for Maya, fresh flowers for her grandmother, or even snacks that they could all enjoy together. These small acts of kindness seemed to brighten their days and provide a sense of normalcy amid the challenges they faced. One evening, the sheriff arrived with a surprise, a small cake he had baked himself. He wasn't much of a cook, but he thought it would be a nice treat for them. When he presented it, Maya's eyes widened with delight. "Did you really make this?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement. He nodded, chuckling a bit. "Well, I did my best. It's not a bakery cake, but I hope it's good enough." Her grandmother joined in the laughter, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Homemade is always the best," she said, a hint of her old spirit shining through. They sat together at the small kitchen table, sharing slices of cake and stories. The sheriff learned more about Maya's life, her dreams of becoming a teacher, the books she loved, and her favorite subjects in school. He was amazed by her resilience and intelligence. That evening, as they enjoyed the cake, her grandmother even shared a story from her own childhood. She spoke of her youthful adventures, the games she played, and the friends she had. It was a beautiful moment, bringing back a sense of connection to a past that seemed so distant now. Maya listened with wide eyes, hanging onto every word. After the cake was gone, the sheriff noticed that her grandmother seemed a little more engaged, a little more present. He suggested they listen to some music together, and he turned on the little radio. They found a station playing lively old tunes, and soon they were all singing along, laughing, and enjoying the moment. The joy in the room was infectious, filling the space with warmth and happiness. As the music played, Maya suddenly got an idea. "Why don't we dance?" she said, her face lighting up with excitement. The sheriff and her grandmother exchanged amused glances, and with a smile, the sheriff agreed. They stood up, and for the first time in what felt like ages, her grandmother took a few careful steps. Maya moved beside her, guiding her gently. The sheriff joined in, leading them in a little dance around the room. It wasn't a grand affair, just simple, gentle movements, but the laughter that filled the air was priceless. For those moments, the worries of their lives faded away. Maya's grandmother, though frail, moved with surprising grace, and Maya's laughter echoed in the small space, a beautiful sound that warmed the sheriff's heart. As the evening came to an end, the sheriff looked at both of them, feeling a swell of emotion. He had witnessed a moment of joy that brought light into their lives. This was the magic of connection, of being there for one another. He realized that these were the moments that truly mattered: the laughter, the stories, the shared cake, and the simple act of dancing together. Before he left that night, he looked at Maya and her grandmother, both still smiling, and said, "Thank you for today. You made my day brighter too." Maya beamed back, her face filled with happiness. "You're part of our family now. You always make things better." As he stepped outside, the sheriff felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had come to this family as a protector, but what he found was much deeper. He had discovered the true meaning of community and connection, where each person had a role in supporting one another. It was a beautiful reminder that love and hope could flourish in even the most challenging times, and he was grateful to be a part of their journey. With a heart full of joy, he walked back to his car, knowing that he would continue to show up for them. In the face of life's hardships, they had found a way to create moments of happiness together, and he was committed to nurturing that bond for as long as they needed him.